If you've started playing Team Fortress 2 within the last 4 years, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Scream Fortress, TF2's annual Halloween event, has always looked like this, with a bunch of new community maps and cosmetics imported into the game, a bunch of missions that you can play to unlock free Halloween restricted costumes, and an apparently random assortment of official content tucked away in a secondary playlist. But Scream Fortress is an annual tradition that goes back over a decade, and is the origin of some of Team Fortress 2's most creative content. So let's take a step through the scary door and see what is on the other side. Team Fortress 2 originally launched in October 2007, and Valve understandably spent the first 2 years working on many of the now core features of the game, such as class-specific mechanics and items, core game modes and maps, and, most importantly, the introduction of hats. But by 2009, Valve were ready to start on what would become an annual event for the game, with the very first ever Halloween update, then known as the Haunted Halloween Special. Now remember that this update was very early on in Team Fortress 2's lifetime, before man vs machine, before crates and trading, before free to play, before the soldier, demoman or engineer even had any unlockable weapons. So in terms of the amount of content, this update was rather modest. But the nature of the content was important in establishing what would eventually become a much beloved pattern of the TF2 Halloween events. This inaugural Haunted Halloween special added the very first Halloween version of a map, Harvest, which in turn introduced the crit pumpkin pickups and the pumpkin bomb map hazards that we know and love so much, as well as starting the tradition of Halloween costumes themed items, including the mildly disturbing Halloween mask and, what is now probably the most famous hat in all of Team Fortress 2, the Ghastly Gibus, or Gibus, if you think being technically correct is the best kind of correct.
Gibus.
To unlock the Gibus these days, players must dominate another player who is already wearing one, while originally it was unlocked through different means. Secretly stashed away in the Haunted Halloween Specials webpage was a link to a hidden second page where viewers could log in with their Steam accounts and claim the first batch of Gibuses, and it wouldn't actually be until 3 years later, for Halloween 2012, that Valve added the Domination Unlock method that we know today. But this hat wasn't the only thing hidden in that update webpage, as it was around this time that Valve was starting to tease snippets of the surprisingly deep Team Fortress 2 backstory. The particular snippet hidden away in this update's webpage shared the last will and testament of Man co-founder Zephaniah Mann, and it told us more about why the battles of Team Fortress take place where they do, and about Zephaniah's relationship with his 2 sons, who we'll learn more about later. We also learned that it is Zephaniah himself who haunts the event version of Harvest and boos players who dare to get too close. After the original Halloween update, Valve decided to get even more creative, and the next 3 years of the event, now known as Scream Fortress, all featured spooky-themed versions of maps inhabited by Halloween bosses who terrorized players on both teams and granted awards to those players who helped to defeat them. There was Man Manor, a reskin of Mountain Lab, haunted by the Horseless Headless Horseman, who, upon being slain specifically by melee, awarded those who contributed with the Horseless Headless Horseman's head and the Haunted Scrap Metal, which could in turn be used to craft the Horseless Headless Horseman's head taker, the Spine-Chilling Skull, or the Voodoo Juju. The next year's event took place on Ioduct, a creepy skinned version of King of the Hill Viaduct, haunted by a giant floating eyeball called Monoculus. Helping to take down this powerful foe awarded players with a hat of the same name, and allowed them to collect the Bombonomicon if they could make it to the podium at the end of Loot Island, which spawns after Monoculus is slain. And thirdly, 2012 saw players visit Ghost Fort, an adaptation of King of the Hill Lakeside, and fight against the great wizard Marasmus himself, as he periodically disguises as furniture and inflicts curses against the players, such as giant heads, low gravity, and 100% crits. After his defeat, players were again able to visit Loot Island and this time claim the hat that Marasmus himself wears, the Skull Island Topper. The epic boss battles weren't the only creativity in these year's updates, and other unique mechanics included the 9 Halloween masks which appeared randomly in gift boxes throughout Man Manor and could be crafted to create a coveted Saxton Hale mask, the introduction of full Halloween costume sets, some of which came with unique voice lines and taunt animations.
Beep-a-boop, maggot!
the introduction of Halloween limited availability unusual effects, cosmetic Halloween spells that could be applied to items to give that item an animated colour changing paint job or give the player particle effect laden footprints, and even a haunted extra tough MVM mission, dubbed Wave 666. These 3 events also carried on the tradition of tying into Team Fortress 2's ever-expanding lore. For example, the Horseless Headless Horseman is suggested to be the ghost of Silas Man, about whom Valve have never told us much, but he appears to be closely related to Man co-founder Zephaniah, the ghost from Harvest. The giant murderous eyeball Monoculus on Ioduct is actually Demoman's disembodied missing eye, haunted by the spirit of the Abominomicon. The comics released alongside both the Monoculus and Marasmus events also reveal a lot about the tumultuous relationship between Marasmus and our beloved mercenary the Soldier, who are revealed to be ever-quarrelling on-again off-again roommates. And of course, most importantly, as the years went on, Valve awarded players who already owned a Gibus additional styles to their hat, enabling the player to wear the ghostly, the ghastly, the ghastlier, or the ghaslierest Gibus. After 3 years of Halloween bosses, Valve's decided to mix things up a bit again. 2013's Scream Fortress 5 brought us another event focused around TF2's ever-evolving story, with a Halloween version of High Tower dubbed Hell Tower, that challenged players to push the corpses of Blutarch and Redmond, the aforementioned sons of Zephaniah Man, in a race towards Hell. Once the objective is captured by either team, all the players are transported to Hell and have to fight in a race to another variation of Loot Island. Those who successfully make it to the top of Loot Island would then obtain the Spellbook, which enabled players to collect and use chaotic magic spells against their opponents. These collectible spells have since become a staple in many community-made Halloween maps. The comic that tied into 2013's update, Grave Matters, tells us about the relationship between Redmond and Blutarch and their third brother, Grey Man, who in later comics actually goes on to become one of the key characters in the overall Team Fortress story. Both Blutarch and Redmond believe that sending the other brother's corpse to Hell will make them still dead but not as dead as the other brother, and therefore able to claim both brothers' shares of their father's inheritance. 2014's Scream Fortress 6 also got creative, and it sent players to the Carnival of Carnage on a customized version of the otherwise seldom played special delivery mode map Doomsday. The gameplay of this event map is perhaps the most creative and chaotic of any of Team Fortress 2's Halloween events, including random curses applied by Marasmus similar to Ghost Fort, making players move like they're underwater, or shrinking everyone and restricting them to melee weapons only. But most uniquely, once the objective is captured, all players are transported to one of 3 bumper car mini-games with Smash Bros-like damage mechanics, requiring one team to score goals with a giant football, collect as many rubber ducks as possible, or survive the falling platforms. Both updates also continued the tradition of lots and lots of new Halloween cosmetics and limited availability unusual effects. In 2015, Valve yet again did something different, in so much as they decided to not develop anything new for this Halloween, but instead re-enable the events of 2009 to 2014 that we've been talking about so far. The majority of new content in the 2015 update was community-created content from the workshop, featuring the now expected Halloween-themed maps, cosmetics and usual effects, as well as some taunts. One thing that was a new feature created by Valve for this Halloween, however, was the introduction of Mirage missions. These were event-focused contracts that asked players to complete objectives against the Halloween bosses and in the various Halloween-themed maps now re-enabled in-game. Upon completion, the missions would reward players with cases and Halloween-restricted cosmetics. At the time, players' contract progress was tracked in a brand new item known as the Soul Gargoyle. Valve did actually address the lack of internally developed content this year before the update even happened, releasing a blog post towards the end of September. They said that they were instead focusing their attention on the next major content update, which would go on to be the Tough Break update, as well as readying Manpower mode to release out of beta, which they did actually end up doing, ultimately releasing it alongside the enabling of the Halloween mode. 2015 was also the last year that there was a tie-in Halloween comic, and although it didn't advance the underlying story in the same way as some of the other years had done, it is still a charming and high-quality comic in the TF2 universe. 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019 and 2020 were all pretty similar affairs, with the main content of those updates being just the re-enabling of previous year's events. There was of course new community cosmetics and new community maps added, as well as contracts to go with these new maps, with the exception of 2017, whose Halloween update actually dropped so close to the previous major update, Jungle Inferno, that there was no community content added at all. 2016 did see the introduction of the Unusualifier tool, used to create unusual taunts, and 2017 did change contracts from being managed via the Soul Gargoyle to the much more detailed interface of the Con Tracker that got introduced in the recent Jungle Inferno update. But overall, the last 5 years of Halloween updates have been almost entirely community-made content imported from the workshop. Despite this, TF2 regularly posts its highest player numbers during October when the Scream Fortress events are activated, with the highest ever reported player count in TF2. And I don't just mean the highest ever Halloween player count, but the highest ever player count being recorded shortly after the event dropped in October 2020. So that is the history of Halloween so far. If you're curious about the future of Team Fortress 2, why not check out this video, where I talk about 5 potential realistic futures that could be ahead of us as Team Fortress 2 fans. Or check out this video that YouTube thinks you might like, and please don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Goodbye.